Next up, we're going to start talking about trophic ecology. Trophic ecology is basically looking at a community, all the living organisms in an area, and saying, okay, who's eating who? So it is investigating the feeding relationships among species. You'll often see this portrayed as food chains. You likely have seen these before at some point in your schooling. So if we looked, for example, at a land food chain, you have like a plant's getting eaten by the grasshopper's getting eaten by the mouse getting eaten by the snake, and the snake's getting eaten by the hawk. So that's like a food chain, starting at the bottom, going all the way up to the top. Now, when we're talking, cat's being very cute. When we're talking about the members of a community, we can put them into groups. We may have mentioned these before. Autotrophs, these are organisms that create their own food through things like photosynthesis or chemosynthesis. Then you have heterotrophs. Heterotrophs are organisms that need to eat other organisms in order to live. So carnivores, herbivores, omnivores, and detritivores or decomposers are all heterotrophs that have to eat other living things to get the energy to survive. Another important thing that's important to talk about when it comes to trophic ecology is primary productivity, because this is the bottom of the food chain, bottom of the food web. This is the rate at which energy, which is usually sunlight, is converted into organic substances that can be used in the food chain or food web. Basically, how fast is carbon dioxide becoming new living biomass? Certain environments will have much higher productivity than others. So you can see in this graph right here, for example, estuaries have extremely high primary productivity. They have a lot of photosynthesis happening, a lot of nutrients. So carbon dioxide is becoming new living stuff very fast in that area. Whereas things like deserts have pretty low primary productivity. There's things are not being converted, carbon dioxide is not becoming new living stuff that fast in those areas. And so importantly, primary productivity is a rate. It's how fast this is happening. We can talk about gross primary productivity, which is like just the total amount of carbon dioxide being converted into organic molecules. We can also talk about net primary productivity, which is that total, but then you subtract the carbon and energy that the actual primary producer is using up through things like respiration. So it's the actual amount of biomass that's then available to like the next chain in the food chain. That's net primary productivity. This is showing some ocean environments and their rate of production, their primary productivity. So you can see like the Arctic Ocean, huge variation all the way from like 1 to 100. Um, Areas like temperate seas in the coastal region, pretty high. Areas in like the middle of the ocean where, like I talked about, nutrients tend to be pretty scarce. It's much lower, so not as much primary productivity. Benthic environments, again, salt marshes can have really, really high primary productivity. Mangrove forest, it tends to be a little lower. Your book has a whole thing that talks about primary productivity and carbon sequestration and mangroves, so you can read about that if you have the textbook. Yeah, this is just showing some different levels of primary productivity, which again, is how fast is photosynthesis happening and creating new biomass for an environment. So if we're talking about primary productivity, that is done by a primary producer. So this is an autotroph at the bottom of the food chain or food web. So you can see like in this little food web we have here, the primary producers that they have here are diatoms, which are a type of phytoplankton. We'll talk more about them in the next few weeks. Yeah, so the little phytoplankton are the primary producers here at the bottom of this food chain. Now, importantly, again, they are converting that carbon dioxide and other inorganic nutrients into these organic molecules that other organisms can use. So all of these organisms up here, the blue whales, the birds, the fish, the copepods, the seals, the killer whales, all of these guys are relying on the new biomass being created by the primary producers. So without these guys, all of these guys up here are going to die out. You need that bottom in order to support everything above them in the food chain. So all these other guys that are not the primary producers, we would call consumers. So consumers are non-autotrophs, they're heterotrophs, right? So they are relying again on that biomass that's being created by the primary producers, whether directly because they're like eating the primary producers, or indirectly because they're, say, eating something that's eating the primary producers. Those consumers that are eating the primary producers we call primary consumers. So they are the first consumer. And then it kind of goes up from there. So secondary, tertiary, quaternary, quaternary, et cetera, depending on how far up you are in the food chain. Now, what I showed on the previous slide is actually not a food chain, it's called a food web, because it is multiple interacting food chains showing who's eating who. It's another food web. So it's a lot of interweaving food chains showing who's eating who. And importantly, these direction of these arrows is also showing like the direction the energy or biomass is going. So for example, down here we have benthos, so like benthic invertebrates mostly. And there's an arrow going from them to the walrus, which means the walrus is eating the like benthic invertebrates. So there again, the energy is going from here to here, and then the killer whale's eating the walrus. So the energy and biomass is going from the walrus to the killer whale. So it's going from the organism being consumed to the consumer. We call this process of energy and biomass getting passed from one level of the food web to the next level trophic transfer. And it's specifically a description of how much of the energy and nutrients and biomass, anything, is getting passed from that or from the organism being consumed to the consuming organism. 'Cause it's not 100%. It's actually not even close to 100%. It is because energy transfer is extremely inefficient. In general, the general rule of thumb is that roughly 10% of the energy at one trophic level gets passed to the next trophic level. So, for example, calories are a measure of how much energy is in food. So the phytoplankton here have, so if you add up the energy and like all the phytoplankton, they would have about 10 million calories, which means the krill, the primary consumer, only get a million calories. And that means that the whale that's eating the krill only gets 100,000 calories. So again, we're losing 90% of the energy each time we transfer to the next level up. And this is also true of biomass. That's why biomass tends to decrease as you move up trophic levels. So usually you need, say, 100 pounds of fish biomass to support, what did I say, 100 to support 1 pound of like seal biomass. So you need so every time you move up the trophic pyramid, you tend to have smaller and smaller biomass if you were to add together everything at that level. Another thing I want to talk about with trophic ecology is when things change. Because, of course, stuff doesn't just stay exactly the same all the time. The biomass of all the different levels of the biomass of individual species in the food web can change for all different kinds of reasons. And that'll have these radiating effects on everything else. So we can put these in two main categories: bottom up effects. So it's kind of just what it sounds like. It starts at the bottom, goes upward. Because again, those primary producers, they are the base of the whole operation. So whatever happens to them is going to get transferred up the food web to everybody else. So if the primary producers increase, you'll tend to also see an increase in everybody else. So there'll be more krill, there'll be more fish, there'll be more big fish, there'll be more seals. Whereas if the primary producers start decreasing, if their population starts going down, you would expect everything above them to also go down. So that's kind of what's showing what's happening here, where the phytoplankton are going down over time. So then the zooplankton go down. So then the forage fish go down. So then the predators go down. So these are bottom up effects. What happens at the bottom gets transferred to everything above it. You can also have top-down effects. This is where either something happens at the top or somewhere kind of in the middle, and that gets transferred downwards. But this is a little more tricky because it has alternating effects. For example, if there's a decrease in these predator species, say because maybe boats come like overfish something, The one below them, the forage fish, now have fewer predators, so they can actually increase their populations. Their population goes up, but since now there's more forage fish, the zooplankton have more predators, so their population goes down. And then since there's less zooplankton, now the phytoplankton don't have as many herbivores and as many predators, so their population goes up. So it kind of goes down, up, down, up, down, up when there's a change at the top. So you have these alternating effects. Next question on your worksheet, let me see if I can move this. Look at the food chain on the right, which is our like ocean marine food chain. Let's say a fishing fleet comes in and removes a bunch of tuna from here. So this tertiary consumer their population gets driven way down. What do you expect will happen to all the other levels, all the other consumers and primary producers in this food chain? Again, if tuna population goes down.